and probably the conditions and the food and everything that's incorporated were probably not the best. In other words, any prison in the United States of America would probably be like a luxurious situation compared to what these guys had to experience on that island of Patmos. And so understanding that, and if I were to say to you, well, what's the moral of the story? What do you think we could come up with? What's the moral of the story?
I'm going to take a stab at it.
Hold on for a second. Why don't you think just a second more? Okay.
Persevered in Christ.
Go ahead. What was yours, Frank?
Following Christ can cost you sometimes.
Following Christ can cost you sometimes. What's the moral of the story?
That you have nobody else to depend on but Jesus Christ himself.
Okay. Now, when I say the moral of the story, what story am I talking about? When I say moral of the story, what's the story?
What happened to John, right?
What's the story? The moral of the story, what's the story? What story do you think I'm thinking about?
Story of John the Baptist.
That's right there.
So you think that when I say moral of the story, I'm looking for something based upon the experience on the island of Patmos.
Right.
Okay.
Or what happened to him.
Maybe that God's in control?
Maybe that's God's in control.
Oh, yeah.
How about this? The moral of the story is God works wondrously even through terribly horrible situations.
This is what he was like.
I mean, do you think John could have had the thought of do you think depression could have might enter into this situation? You're not able to see the people you like to see. You're not able to do the things you like to do. And you're in this horrible situation. But yet, you could just kind of crawl into kind of a ball and be an introvert over this terrible situation. Or you could be praising Jesus and have a positive attitude. And what happens as a result of that? God gives him an experience to where he goes right up into heaven and he's asked to record this book of Revelation, which is being recorded and re-recorded all over the world now for nearly 2,000 years. I mean, how would you have liked to have been John and had that experience and that blessing of being able to enter into the presence of God? And so here he was in this horrible, terrible situation, and there were higher principles, bigger stuff, bigger fish to fry going on, and these situations really meant nothing. And we take that principle and we apply it to our own lives. And what do we get out of that? You know, oftentimes it doesn't. What does it take to really get you disturbed? What does it take to really rock your world? What does it really take to throw you off kilter? Is it more than what John experienced on this island, or less?
Yes.
Maybe a lot less, huh?
Yes.
You see, and so he had to have kept a certain mindset, a certain relationship with God in these circumstances, and as a result of that, God honored him and blessed him with this supernatural experience and the privilege to be able to preserve this message and pass it on to other people through the annals of time. Go ahead.
I always remind myself that, as you say, God sees the big picture, from the beginning to the end. And whenever we're in what we consider a trial, which obviously is very little compared to that, it just seems so big, and it's just for a moment.
Yeah.
And then as we grow as Christians, as we persevere, for me personally, I can continue to look back on the trial and say, all right, well, I know how that worked out if I had to handle it on my own versus when God handles it.
Right.
And knowing that it's just for that moment, especially as we become older, we can see that,
The trials of your faith are more precious than gold, even much fine gold. You see, so you have an encounter with a person, and all of a sudden You know, you have a disturbance and man, you park company, I never want to see that guy again, or I never want, you know, and all these things, we just chop, 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 and we get manipulated and we react to our circumstances, and that shows a lack of the fruit of the Spirit of peace, and it shows a lack of our faith in God might work something wondrously out of this circumstance that seems to be a bit uncomfortable for us at that moment. Go ahead.
So what would be application if you're in like that situation you're saying in?
I'm saying expect in every situation God's sovereign presence and will and direction and guidance through that situation. In other words, every day doesn't have to be the 4th of July, but are you able to maintain that peace within your heart and that relationship with Jesus independent of circumstances? And that's the optimum situation. That's the goal of our relationship with Christ. One of the goals is to be able to have that inner peace and in a endurance manner, and our just flipping out and snapping and coming all unglued and letting that old man just take over really shows our lack of faith, our lack of loyalty, our lack of endurance, and everything else. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
You know, so it's a process. So you can. We're here in a Bible study, so we're going over these verses and we're learning these verses. And by the time you get through, what was the verse that I told you that that I thought all of you guys should have in memory, or you shouldn't let loose tonight?
Isaiah
44:6.
what?
Isaiah 44:6.
Isaiah 44:6. So man, I said that to you, and now you've all kicked it back to me, and you can walk out of this Bible study with the memorization in your mind of Isaiah 46 and live the rest of your life, live the rest of your life and never forget Isaiah 44:6. I know I'll never forget it unless I somehow become, in old age, I lose my mind or something, but as long as I've got sanity, I will never forget Isaiah 44:6. The question is am I going to forget